Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today, it's a big one. We're going to be talking about the newest album from Eminem called Revival. So do you ever have that feeling before going into a movie or a game or a record that while you desperately hope it's going to be good, you know deep down it probably won't be? That slow sinking feeling as your rational mind overrides a sense of hype and the feeling that nothing could ever really live up to your expectations, even if they aren't all that high? Well, yeah, that's how I felt going into Revival. And if anything, it was even worse because I have been an Eminem fan for decades now. I'll admit to being one of those fans for whom Eminem was my introduction to more hip-hop that can rattle off multiple Eminem songs from memory, bar for bar. Not just singles either, but deep cuts and diss tracks from the mixtapes too. And as I grew and matured as a critic and heard so much more hip-hop, and Eminem's flaws came much more sharply into view in contrast, it also led to a different sort of artistic appreciation for even his worst albums. While Encore is far from good, it was a sort of record that at least understood its purpose of artistic suicide, even if it was a middle finger to the audience. And I still hold a Relapse that is criminally underrated to this day, where Slim Shady was revealed to be as perverse and deranged as he always was before, this time without any sort of veneer of cool, and that could alienate audiences. And even though I would likely agree with the assertion that Eminem becomes less impressive as an artist the more hip-hop you will hear, I don't think even in the best in the game would deny his talent for his wordplay, his charisma, and his uncanny knack for mainstream crossover success, and his ability to comment on that. And thus, when I heard that Eminem was looking to get more political for his upcoming album Revival, not only was I not all that surprised, I was also extremely encouraged. For many white people, Eminem was one of the few rappers they would ever listen to or cite as a favorite of theirs. He spoke across demographics and genres, and that's potent. And he's never been uncomfortable speaking truth to power, especially given how much he continued to identify with his working class roots in Detroit, and he would get vitriolic about it just like he did in the past. But in the lead up to this release, and especially after the track and feature list was released, I had a really bad feeling about this, with names showing up for a lot of potential for pop crossover, but few, if any, of the relevant acts making conscious hip-hop right now in the mainstream. You would think someone of his stature would use this opportunity to put some names over, instead of pass over more production to Alex the Kid and hooks to goddamn Skylar Grey, an artist who has never been interesting or compelling, who has been neutering the power of Eminem's hooks for far too long. But you know what? If Eminem wasn't willing to venture outside of his comfort zone to make his political or artistic statement, this could be a pretty rough listen. But again, I am an Eminem fan. I have defended records from him that many would brand as legendarily terrible. So, can I defend Revival? Well, honestly, no. I really can't defend Revival beyond some isolated moments, because this is a sort of album that has so many mishandled creative decisions that I'm not sure how anything salvageable could have been pulled from this record. It's the album that springs to mind the most as an apt comparison to this. It's 50 Cent's Animal Ambition back in 2014, an utterly mishandled comeback that doesn't seem to grasp a lot of the performer's strengths against a lot of badly chosen production, a lot of really corny hooks, and content that is nowhere near as interesting or provocative as the performer thinks that it is. And while I will not consider this the worst thing I've heard this year, after all AJR is still out there, I won't deny that this was a real disappointment, with a few brighter moments not redeeming an avalanche of bland mediocrity or outright garbage. In other words, Eminem's Revival, it's not good. And we have to start this conversation off with Eminem himself. And you know what? I will say it again. As a performer, he still has a remarkable amount of emotive charisma and intensity. Even if it might be utterly misplaced at points, and there are a few places where that definitely is, and we'll get to it, Eminem still has enough presence in order to really grab the listener's attention. And he will always be a rapper who can string together rhymes with skill and dexterity and really an impressive amount of variety. But at the same time, I've always considered the ability to rap as the baseline of talent in hip-hop, and by the time we get the second song, Believe Me, as he struggles to force his multi-syllabic bars into a triplet flow, it's hard not to see Eminem struggling to keep up with the times, or at the very least not showing the same lyrical dexterity with flows that he has demonstrated on the past albums, where he could mimic other people's flows really quite well. And on some level, this confuses me, for as much as Eminem professes to pay attention to modern hip-hop, especially in the mainstream, and for as good of a rapper as he is, I'm a little bit stunned that his delivery can feel this gets disjointed. Even on more traditional verse structures, he can sound really staccato or off-kilter, and not in a good way. And while he might not be reintroducing the accents that peppered Relapse, they never bothered me, but they bothered a lot of people, there were definitely points where you can tell that he's overselling or overemphasizing his vocal delivery, not helped by some of the most god-awful vocal production I've heard in hip-hop all year. Seriously, whoever mixed and mastered Eminem's vocal pickup on Revival should be taken behind the woodshed and shot, because it's so muddy when it's not faded in awkward ways, even as crisp and clear as his frequent guest hooks are, and considering there are no guest verses, that's a bad sign when it comes to a lot of the contrast between his guest stars and Eminem himself. It doesn't make him sound good. And again, let's blow through these guest hooks pretty quickly. Beyonce is the biggest saving grace on Walk on Water. She really does elevate that song. It's a damn crime that Fresher gets nothing to do on Chloroseptic. Alicia Keys deserved a lot better vocal production on Like Home. Skylar Grey ends up recycling recovery era garbage on Tragic Endings. Kalani is utterly pointless on Nowhere Fast. Ed Sheeran deserves to be more of an Eminem target than a featured guest on River. Ex-Ambassadors remains an utterly worthless group, and their hook and production on Bad Husband is utterly nauseating, and Eminem got more to do on Revenge with Pink on her record this year, Beautiful Trauma, than he does on their collaboration here on his own album. So okay, might as well take a look at some of that production here, consistently the weak point with Eminem's work in the 2010s, and sadly it's no less true here. Again, the biggest issue remains the utter lack of subtlety and consistency. When Eminem tries to get conscious on Like Home, or sentimental like on Walk on Water, Nowhere Faster or Rose, he goes for overwrought pianos, swelling strings, and sampling Leanne Rimes and Bette Midler that clashes really awkwardly with a clumsily mixed and too heavy percussion. When he's trying to tell stories about bad relationships like on River, or especially Bad Husband, he sticks with more modern, turgid alt-rock tones that are more Shawn Mendes than anything with real edge or grit. Why that caterwauling chipmunk tone is drizzled over the hook of Bad Husband, I have no idea, but it sounds awful. When he goes for modern trap tones like on Believe or Chloroseptic, it's a little bit stunning that with his vast wealth, he can't buy a trap beat that can match the atmosphere of your average Metro Boomin or Zaytoven beat. Again, the mixing here just feels cheap and clumsy, and it sure as hell doesn't have the weight of dissing mumble rappers who often have better production here. But we need to cut to the meat of this, and what really pisses me off: the rock sampling. Starts off early with an incredibly misplaced Cheech and Chong sample on Untouchable and just gets worse from there. And what I find infuriating is the waste of it all. The Eminem can clearly afford to license samples from Joan Jett on Remind Me, or the Cranberries on In Your Head, or from Run DMC and the Beastie Boys on Heat, and the most he will do is graft his verses against a cheap approximation of their hook or a bastardization of it. Now, granted, Eminem has done this before, going all the way back to Sing for the Moment on the Eminem Show, but it's never felt as slapdash and wasteful as it does here, taking perfectly good songs and running them through the meat grinder of ugly percussion and fuzz that adds nothing. Now, you also get a few horrorcore leaning deep cuts like Framed with the warped guitar work, or the twisted sample behind Offended, but in both cases, the hooks are utterly obnoxious, or like on Offended, can even be bothered to match the general cadence of the rest of the song, something even Relapse and Encore consistently executed. I have no idea why this was mishandled here. But now we have to get to the content, and for as much it would be so easy for me to just finish off this review by stringing up a list of atrocious bars and lines across this project that rarely, if ever, show the wit or humor that made Eminem tolerable even at his worst, as a fan, I'm gonna try to go a little bit deeper, put all that stuff aside, at least somewhat. And the first thing that needs to be established is that in terms of theme or dramatic arc, as much as Eminem tries to set up his diminishing fame, his faltering bars, and real insecurity and Walk on Water paint him as more of the underdog to his fans, pay all of it off, we would need to see M hit a new height of quality, or see some form of renewal going off in a new direction maybe. Instead, what's truly all the more galling about Revival is how much of it plays as a retread of stuff he's done in the past and done better. Horrorcore that reads as a rejected B-sides from the Slim Shady LP or the Marshall Mathers LP, or especially Relapse. Assertions of hip-hop dominance that increasingly lack teeth as Eminem refuses to name names, which baffles me considering that would be an easy way to spark up the controversy that he craves so much and clean the clocks of some weaker targets who really deserve to be targeted, especially in the mainstream. Then he's got the toxic relationship songs desperately trying to bring back the success of Love the Way You Lie and failing, and even the closing set of songs replaying the overdose event in 2007 that we already saw on Deja Vu on Relapse, along with messages to his daughter Haley and his late friend Proof, where that appears even after You're Never Over from Recovery, he still hasn't found any closure. Then we got the political commentary that comes on Untouchable and Like Home, and again, this is one of those points where M's near complete abandonment of subtlety really hurts him, as well as his refusal to get any sort of guest rappers from the mainstream or underground to help speak to these issues, or even just elevated thanks to Eminem's tremendous platform. And look, I get how M painting with a broad brush on these songs, it's primarily targeting his white fan base who will refuse to engage otherwise with more conscious hip-hop, but the snide tone, the hectoring lyrics, and the very surface approach to these messy issues, it's a far cry from how deep a song like White America could cut from the Eminem Show, or even on Encore with the anthemic rage of a song like Mosh. But of course, one of the reasons the political tracks mostly worked in the past was the presence of the Slim Shady alter ego, the twisted, virulent id of white America that said all the things the audience never wanted to admit but wanted to say about themselves in its sick satirical picture. But without that lens and subtlety in place on Revival, the thematic contradictions, they're a lot messier and a lot less excusable. In other words, it's a lot harder to take shallow Eminem's politics when on the topic of women, he says he made strides with all those rape lines. And while I get all offended is attempting to scandalize the audience, we're in 2017. We're in the era of Filthy Frank and Run the Jewels and Cupcake. Getting scatological and talking about all the women you want to assault for pure provocation does feel like punching down, lazy, and overdone at this point. Especially if you want us to take any of your hyper-earnest political commentary remotely seriously. Or hell, take any of your songs about relationships or women seriously. Between you squeezing in bad puns and poop jokes into River, a song about infidelity and abortion, or Bad Husband, where we get a phoned-in many sides reconciliation with Kim, or any of the asinine, trashy hookups of Remind Me or Heat, overloaded with dad jokes and the cheap follow-up to White Trash Party from Recovery, yet seemingly with even less self-awareness. But you know what, I will give him this. On songs like Walk on Water and In Your Head, he is somewhat understanding of how his own sloppy framing in the past meant the deeper message behind the Slim Shady alter ego was missed and misused. And yet, his belligerent refusal to really accept any responsibility for what he's done now, and then continue so much of the same behavior without any excuse for it now, it hollows out any point he's trying to make, especially when the technique and the music is somehow worse than ever. And look, I can't tell you how much I was desperately trying to like this album. I feel like Yahtzee Croshaw reviewing Duke Nukem Forever 6 or 7 years ago. But Eminem entrenching himself behind a wall of mirrors shows a rapper forever living in the reflection of a legacy that with every single lackluster record he pushes out continues to diminish. And while he might be vaguely aware of this, his attempts to swivel out of that skid don't address the naked self-obsession at its core and how much he's just more internally focusing on making everything about himself, and thus with every clunky beat, misshapen flow, or badly chosen reference, things just keep getting worse. Nathan Rabin once referred to Eminem as the Charles Foster Kane of modern pop music, to quote, a defeated titan nursing old grievances from a giant, empty palace of a home that has devolved into a ghoulish realm of unfulfilled potential. And that was in 2004, coming off of Encore. But that record at least had a consistent through line, few standout tracks, something that Revival painfully lacks. So yeah, even though it really pains me as a fan to say it, it's Eminem's worst album. It's getting a very light 4 out of 10. I can't recommend it. And at this point, Eminem, he's got the money to do whatever he wants. He should forget about any sort of pop appeal. Go back to the underground, dude. Get some beats with some actual grit and complexity. Work with underground MCs who would love to get the cosign. Forget about Trump paying attention to you and get something out of your own head. Maybe then, probably only then, we might see some return to quality. At least I hope so. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I know this review went on long, but again, I'm an Eminem fan, and this one really hurt. I was so disappointed in this. But hey, if you want to buy it, links in the description below. Got the poll up there for all you Eminem stans to tell me how wrong I am, even though I really don't think I am, and we all should know better by now. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you guys want to get involved in my scheduling process before the end of the year, link to my Patreon is right over there. Where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule, and once a week for the higher tier contributors, you guys get to add albums, movies, or even a top 10 list to that schedule. More details right there, but till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.